Hey there, welcome back to Unit 2 in AP Psychology with me, your teacher, Miss Baines, on the biological bases of psychology. Actually, there's going to be two parts, two videos, and two parts of notes that we're going to do here because if we didn't, this video would be super way too long for anybody's attention span to deal with, including my own. Okay, so this is all about the brain. Grab a pen, grab your binder notes, Unit 2. Video 4, The Brain, Part 1. I'll see you on the other side. Okay, today is all about the more primitive parts of the brain. Tomorrow we're going to talk about more of the cerebral cortex and the advanced parts of our brain. Up first, though, I think it's really important, if you look at the learning targets here, that you see all the different things that we have to cover. Okay, so we're going to get through a lot of these in this first video, but definitely the rest of them in that second video tomorrow. So make sure tomorrow you watch part 2 of the rest of the brain. Before we even talk about the different parts of the brain, though, is the way that we look at the brain with imaging and with scan. The part that we're dealing with is the middle of the brain, kind of where the pituitary gland was when we were studying the endocrine system earlier today. You go up through the spine and into the center of your head, way deep inside, and in the middle brain, we have all of our more primitive, earlier developed parts of the brain that control our most basic functioning, like heartbeat and breathing. Okay, so let's talk about how the heck we know about these parts of the brain and all of these techniques to begin with, right? How do we even get inside to look inside to see what it looks like? One of the early ways that we still use is called brain lesions. Okay, brain lesions are where a surgeon will experimentally cut into and destroy brain tissue on purpose, which sounds terrible to say, but they want to study the behaviors after such destruction has taken place. Now, this could happen in a variety of ways. One of the ways could be with a stroke patient, as well as brain tumors. Okay, you might just find somebody who has severe depression, and by cutting into certain parts of the brain and making lesions, you can sometimes offset whatever the activity in the brain is making the person depressed, and they can study it and fix it. You can't just go and get somebody off the street or an animal while they're alive and slice into the brain and see how it scars over and read the tissue. Okay, but when it happens naturally, and unfortunately in certain people, we can study those people who have the lesions, and the abnormalities of those lesions are done for scientific and medicinal purposes. And in extreme cases, a doctor might go in and destroy certain parts of the brain for what is in the best interest of the patient. Now, we're going to talk about scans and different imaging techniques. There are a lot of them, so let's start with the electroencephalogram. Comes first, which is an amplified recording of the electrical waves sweeping across the brain surface, measured by the electrodes that are placed on top of the scalp. You'll see these little electrodes are attached to little wires, and then the readout here is the brain waves or the brain activity that's happening in each one of these wires is connected to an image of a different line of brain scan. Okay, so when you participate in this type of brain scan, they'll put like the swim cap on with a little bit of lubricant that conducts the electricity through the holes in the swim cap, and these little guys here, these little electrodes, will read out a printout of all the different parts and sections of the brain. They might have you watch a commercial or watch something that's provocative to see how much the peaks and valleys happen as the electroencephalogram is reading the waves in your head. The next one up is magnetic resonance imaging scan, or an MRI. I'm sure you've heard of this one, right? This one uses magnets, a magnetic field and radio waves to produce computer-generated images that distinguish among the different types of brain tissue. It's kind of like an X-ray for the brain. It's seen in this image down here on the bottom, and if you look really closely, you can see the different magnets coming in and out, picking up the soft tissue and the bone. And The fMRI is a brain scan that measures the activity by detecting changes associated with the blood flow to specific parts of the brain. The patient interacts with information, again, reads some kind of commercial or some kind of reading or pictures of through the MRI. It's like you go into this tunnel, you lay down on a slab, and there's this thing that you lie down on and go through really slowly. You wear sometimes headphones and music, and the MRI technician will ask you a series of questions, or they'll have like a screen, and they're there behind the screen, like, is taking pictures, either really happy thoughts or bad thoughts, and see what the activity is that's going on by taking a picture of different sections of different parts of the brain. The fMRI maps out the different sections that light up, so to speak, when you're dealing with certain parts of the brain. So when you're talking, this part might light up. When you're learning, this part might light up over here. When you're sneezing, this part might light up. When you're doing whatever, different parts have different functions. Where there is blood flow, the fMRI will pick it up and see what parts of the brain are being used at a specific moment. Okay, the next scan is called a PET scan. A PET scan is a positron emission tomography, which sounds like a transformer or something, but it's a process. It's a process that is used to observe metabolic processes in the body. The processes that take place in the brain, so the patient will actually somehow drink this radioactive glucose, right? This bright orange drink, and you'll see it down here against the regular body. It lights up with that radioactivity so that you can see what's going on inside the human body or the brain. Form of glucose, and the way that you know the body is expending energy is when you put sugar into it and you watch what happens. The PET scan takes pictures of it being used in the body. It's super cool. It gives you so much information. Okay, the next one is a CT scan or CAT scan. I'm sure you've heard of the CAT scan, which stands for computerized tomography. And this is the one that combines a series of X-ray images taken from different angles. Okay, so you have X-ray images and a computer, and it takes these sort of slices, right? It has this fancy X-ray ability to see cross-sections or different slices of the brain or the body or whatever it is that it's looking at. What that means is you can see it by looking at it. Over here you can see like a dozen or so pictures all happening at the same time, but you can see different cross-sections of the brain all at once. It's like if you sliced off the top of your forehead and took the cap of your top of your head off, they can go down into the brain and look inside and see what's going on. CAT scan allows you to do this in three-dimensional images in order to see what's going on, or what's wrong, or what's growing, or what's not growing, or what isn't working. Okay, that is what a CT scan is. All right, so we've talked about the different scans and how we look at pictures of the brain through imaging, radio waves, magnetic waves, and so on. Now let's talk about the parts of the brain. Right after that chart that you have with the different labeled parts of the brains, we also have this sort of profile of a human being's head. Right, here's the nose, here's the mouth, the chin, and this is the brain and the skull, and we're going to label all of the parts on the image, and we're going to go down part by part and label them, and then we're going to talk a little bit about each of the different functions within. Okay, so we're only going to do about 10 parts today, and then we'll do the bulk of the learning about the more sophisticated parts of the brain tomorrow. Okay, so right here at the very top we have the cerebral cortex. It's a guy up here that always looks like the cartoon version of the brain, right? When they kind of make the brain look like the brain, it's these deep ridges and lines that look like intestines. That's your cerebral cortex. Okay, we'll talk about each of these in detail later on. Let's just get them labeled for now. This band of fibers over here underneath the cerebral cortex, right here, that is the corpus callosum. It's this dense band, no gaps in it. It's really firm. It's kind of rubbery, and that is called the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum combines the two brains that are inside your head, because yes, we do actually have two brains. We have the regular brain inside our skull, and within that brain we have this little guy over here called the cerebellum. Cerebellum is like a little mini brain, what controls all of our movements, our balance, our coordination, when we jump, that we land on 2 feet, right? So think of it like an Olympic athlete going in for the score in whatever sport they're playing, and they have a really beautiful, thick cerebellum, okay? So all the balance and coordination is controlled in the cerebellum. The thalamus over here across the street from the cerebellum is this egg-shaped guy up here, okay? That's the sensory switchboard. It's kind of like this egg-shaped very top of your brain stem, which is right here, okay? That the thalamus essentially is a sensory switchboard, which what I mean by that is that messages come through our senses. Our sensory messages are things like seeing with your eyes, hearing with your ears, tasting with your mouth, and touching and feeling with your skin at the tips of your fingers, right? So all of your sensory functions take place from the thalamus. The information goes in through to your thalamus, and your thalamus then decides what the correct places are in the brain to send the messages to. For example, say that you're looking at the screen right now, right? You're seeing, you're doing a visual activity, watching me on the screen describe the brain. So the message goes through your eyeballs to the back of the optic nerve, which is connected to the thalamus, and then the thalamus says, oh, she's seeing right now. That's a visual message. So I have to send that visual message to the proper place. And in this case, the proper place is the occipital lobe. And the back of the brain, the thalamus and the hypothalamus, which is underneath the thalamus, controls the pituitary gland. And that means your drives. The hypothalamus controls things like hunger, thirst, having a good body temperature regulation, right? You don't get too fevered, you don't get too low of a temperature, and even your sex drive. Okay, all those drives are controlled by your hypothalamus right here underneath the thalamus, which controls the sensory messages. We already talked about the hypothalamus seeing over the pituitary gland, which sends all the messages to all the glands and the rest of the body in the endocrine system. So what we've got here, this big section, is the brain stem, okay? And in that brain stem, we have these things called pons, another oval egg-shaped function, ability to sleep through the night and to go through all the stages of sleep. It controls also the regulation of your breathing. Brainstem really has something or other to do with all the basic functions of living. If your brainstem or any of its parts, the cerebellum, the pons, and so on, if any of it is damaged, you pretty much die because you can't breathe and your heart doesn't beat. Pons are involved with the breathing and the sleeping, and then we have the medulla oblongata controls your heartbeat, right? With your heartbeat and your breathing, it keeps you alive. In this section here, it's called the brain stem, right? We have the spinal column here. This brain stem here is super important, basic functions of living. If your brain stem or any of its parts, the cerebellum, the pons, and so on, if any of it is damaged, you pretty much die because you can't breathe and your heart doesn't beat. The pons are involved with the breathing and the sleeping, and then we have the medulla oblongata controls your heartbeat, right? With your heartbeat and your breathing, it keeps you alive. Okay, so anything that has to do with the basic functioning of living if your brain stem is damaged, you die, right? The medulla oblongata is underneath, and that controls your heartbeat, okay? The medulla controls your heartbeat. If it's damaged, you don't live anymore. If your heart's not beating, you don't live anymore. So all these things are these primitive, right? Forget about reading and writing and learning. This is about keeping our body, our hearts beating, and our lungs pumping, and our selves breathing. All the way down here, we have the reticular activating system, also called the reticular formation. Okay, write that down. Reticular formation is a band of neurons or fibers that go up the back of your brainstem. Okay, so here's your brainstem over here, and the reticular activating system goes up the back. Okay, it activates you. What that means, the activating system controls your ability to be alert, your ability to wake up in the morning, right? You're built in. Sometimes you say you have an alarm clock built inside of you. It just knows when to wake you up, right? But it also controls when you hear your name and you're deep in a dream and you're sleeping. And like, what? And you wake up, right? Yeah, it's me, I'm here, right? That's your reticular activating system kicking in, your built-in alarm clock, okay? And then you have your spinal cord, okay? The spinal cord is over here, right by the brain stem, underneath. This brain stem is the spinal cord, and the brain sits on top of the brain stem, and the brain stem sits on top of the spinal cord. Okay? Now these down here, the pons, the medulla oblongata, and the reticular activating system all form one thing that is called the brain stem. Okay, it's super important. I'm going to say it again. The pons and medulla and the reticular activating system form the brain stem. Make sure you have that written down. The next spot that I want to go to is what is called the limbic system. Okay, the limbic system is a set of brain structures that are located on both sides of the thalamuses. Okay, so if the brain is cut open and there's two hemispheres, right? Remember, the thalamus is the egg-shaped structure, right? That goofy-looking egg-shaped structure that kind of sits on the top of your brain stem. Okay, the limbic system has almost like two C's, like two little shrimp, right? Here's one of them, the hippocampus and the amygdala, and then the other side of the hippocampus and the amygdala. It's split open so that you're seeing two hemispheres. Your thalamus are immediately beneath the temporal lobes, where your temples are. Okay, these are your temples, your temporal lobes. So your thalamus is underneath it, and it's that egg-shaped split of the two C's. Okay, these are your temporal lobe, and it controls your emotion, your behavior, your motivation, your memory, and all new learning. I'm going to say that again. Your thalamus controls emotion, behavior, motivation, learning, and all new memories. Okay, that shows you all the different parts of the limbic system. Here's another picture of the limbic system. Okay, another perspective. The hypothalamus controls all of our drives, our hunger, our thirst, our body temperature, and our sex drives. The amygdala controls our extreme emotions like fear and aggression and being alert and being ready to fight or flight. Our hippocampus processes all of our learning and all of our memories. Okay, the pink band here is the hippocampus. The corpus callosum connects the two sides of the two hemispheres of the brain. It's that tight band that holds together the two hemispheres. And then the sensory switchboard is the thalamus, which we're looking at it from the other angle here. The thing next to the pituitary gland, that is a sensory switchboard. All messages that come in through the nose, the ears, the eyes, and the skin, everything except for smell, which is its own thing, and we'll talk about that later. All sensory switchboard organs and messages come in through the thalamus, and that is all known as the limbic system. Okay? So once again, the corpus callosum are those fibers that join together your two hemispheres of your brain. You're going to be seeing lots of different slices of the brain and different angles, so it's important to know where these things are in relation to each other. Okay, so that's really all I have for you today. We talked a lot about a couple of the different primitive parts of the brain stem, the amygdala, the hippocampus. I want you to think of the hippocampus like a college campus, right? The hippocampus, the hippo is on campus learning, right? Just picture a little hippo cartoon going on to college, on a college campus for the first day learning. And that's pretty much it. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the more sophisticated parts of the frontal lobe and the brain structures that control all the other functions in our bodies. And I'll see you there. Night, night.